everyone. I think it's better we start so that we won't take much of our time. We hope that more people will join in the discussion um, as the lecture progresses. So my job is simple, is to thank you for joining us for this edition of our distinguished personality lecture, which is titled Courts Are for the Rich and We Do Not Rely on Contracts. Trust and alternative institutions shaping Nigerian small and medium-sized businesses. To be delivered by none other than Dr. Kingsley Omie, who is going to be introduced by the moderator as the program progresses. Just to say that this is part of one of the flagship programs of the West African Traditional Justice Center, which is tailored towards making interventions in research and practice of transitional justice in West Africa and even globally. And so part of what we're trying to do in this edition of our lecture is to explore the concept of trust and how this plays out on a day-to-day basis within merchants, traders in the Nigerian context, and how this, can be understood within the context of conflict management and resolution. So without taking much of your time, I would like to introduce the moderator for the day, Father Charles Adeni Ishoyobo, a longtime friend who is present in the UK, works with Mind UK as a psychotherapist, and also is doing his doctoral degree at the University of Middlesex. I hope I got all Sussex. I always mix both up, but we will do that better. So he's undergoing his doctoral studies and it's also, both of them have been supporting the center as our fellows. And so I'll hand over where there's no mic here, so the screen to Father Charles Shinobo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Philip Olayokun, and thank you for introducing me in that august way, even though you're supposed to be moderate. So I welcome everyone this afternoon on this platform to this edition of our Distinguished Personality Lecture. And the man of the moment, I just take some few minutes to be able to introduce him. But like they say, all protocols are duly observed. And when you say that two things are involved, is either one, you don't know protocols, or two, you want to save time. But in this contest, I think I want to save time and not, disturb myself with all protocols that I'm supposed to observe.
But are you still observing the protocol? I think we had a network.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me? I think the network just.
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, we're back. Sorry for that internet glitch. So today, this moment, I want to introduce the chief speaker for this topic before us. There's a man that wears many, many hats, a man of many parts. Dr. Kingsley Omie is currently an assistant professor of entrepreneurship and management practice at the University of Aberdeen. He's a co-founder and chair of African Studies at the British Academy of Management. He serves as the chair of the entrepreneurship in management at the Institute of Small Business and Entrepreneurship. He received his PhD from the University of the West of Scotland with a major in entrepreneurship and small business management and development economics. His research interest is in emergence of economic institutions and organizations. Of course, he had his MBA from the University of Aberdeen, and he had done some serious studies in this topic, talking about institution, talking about organization, talking about economics. business, small scale, medium scale, and every other thing. I've known Dr. Kingsley for past 3 decades, over 30 years. Was my senior, 2 years senior in St. Teresa Minor Seminary, Okare. And coming to hear him speak after 30 years, that we have known. For me, that's something that is highly remarkable. But today is going to talk about courts are not for the rich, and we don't rely on contracts. Trust as an alternative institution shaping Nigerian small and medium-sized business. Like we know, trust and reputations are universal qualities that clearly benefit every profession, whether it's small business or corporation. And we can all benefit from having trust in someone. Of course, there are sometimes we lose trust as well. When trust is kicked out of the door, love is kicked out of the door. But this afternoon, I want to implore you, we should listen, with rapt attention and to see what the chief speaker has to offer us. And I promise you, it's going to be an interesting conversation. We have time for questions and answers. You can always drop me questions at the chat section, and we'll read it out at the time for question and answer. I know that we don't have much time, so we'll probably run out of time than running out of the ideas we have on our slides. So I want to employ everyone. So please welcome to this forum and for this presentation, Dr. Kingsley Omeye. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Father. Thank you very much, Dr. Olayoku. Father Chambon, I think that was a brilliant introduction. And for me, I couldn't have introduced myself any better. And I would say it's a pleasure to be here to be able to present my paper. Now, rather than the traditional ways in which we do such workshops, right? I wouldn't go through the traditional way whereby you start to talk about the findings and the key implications of the research. I want to be able to take us through the journey in terms of how the research has gone. So I'm kind of bringing you into the real world of the local actors and into the real world of how I was able to undergo the research. And the research is a product of, or the study is a product of a research conducted 2 or 3 years ago. It's 2018. And I think in that research, I was able to tease out incredible findings. So I will share my screen. I'll talk you through, and I'll try and keep it roughly less than 20-30 minutes so that we can have enough time to take questions and answers. So if you don't mind, please mute your microphone so that we don't really have any noise interferences. Dr. Shambo, you might have to also your camera, if you don't mind. Just a minute. For some reason, it's just a minute. I'm having, I don't know. Just a minute. I'm having the system is slightly hanging, so if you give me a minute. I just don't want to talk through the slides without talk through the presentation without sharing the slides. Or what I can do in the interim is, Dr. Shirambo, maybe I might have to send you the slides if that is okay by you.
Yes, please send the slides. Send the slides.
Yeah, let me send the slides since on my part it's what email? Okay, I think I should send it to Philip Olayoku. What email should I send it to? Philip?
Gmail, please.
Can you say it out?
Philip.olayoku@gmail. My two names, dots.
Yeah. At Gmail. Yeah. So I sent it to you. So if you don't mind sharing the screen, because over here, I think maybe because there were too many cameras on, it's that difficulty.
Okay, I'm trying to access it, but you can continue. So I'll just join you later. I'm on it.
Okay. Okay, guys. So while we wait for Dr. Olayoku to host the slides, I'm sorry for that technical glitch. Right. So I'll talk you through my presentation. So my presentation starts with the title, Cuts Are for the Rich and We Do Not Rely on Contracts. And this is one of the excerpts from some of the responses from my participants, right? And the general area around this presentation is around the concept of trust. And an interesting citation by George Simmels, right, in 1990 highlights the fact that without the general trust that people have in each other, the society itself would disintegrate. And that is really the core of our discourse today, understanding how trust works within a low trust environment such as Nigeria, a developing market context. Now, moving to the background of the research problem. Now, within the Nigerian community and within developing markets context, right, it is acknowledged that small and medium-sized enterprises play an important role in Nigeria's GDP, right? And over the years, despite the challenging environment and despite the challenges of doing business within Nigerian context, right, SMEs to date, even pre-colonial times, have demonstrated unique abilities in adapting to their challenging environments. Now, a recent report by the OECD and the World Bank, right, points out that a huge fraction of businesses undertaken by SMEs in Nigeria occurs within the informal sector. And a good question you want to ask is, why do these SMEs operate in the informal sector? This is because the cost of doing business in the formal sector is high, and these SMEs find it difficult to operate in the formal sector. But despite these challenges, what you find out is these small businesses have been able to draw on their networks, or the informal networks, right, or the informal network arrangements to benefit from the importance of trade and, of course, regional trade. I think a lot of people do not really know this, but about 95% of Nigerian businesses are actually dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, some of the misconceptions that people have had is that they do believe that the multinationals or the big corporates play a huge role in Nigeria's economic acceleration or economic recalibration. But of course, that is true. However, without the SMEs, which account for 95% of Nigerian businesses, there will be a challenge in regards Nigeria's economic stability. Now, I think also an interesting discourse, an interesting white paper pointed out by the World Bank was that despite Nigeria's incredible growth, being Africa's most populous nation and being Africa's biggest economy, that Nigeria's economy has been hindered by the absence of formal institutions, right? And as we go on, I will kind of discuss what institutions mean and how they are different from our kind of our understanding of what institutions are, right? But so the World Bank white paper highlights that Nigeria's compelling growth potentials has been hindered by the weakness and the inefficiency of its formal institutions. And what you get is, as a result of these weak institutions, you realize that small enterprises, small and medium-sized enterprises face specific challenges in their enterprise development because they do not have access to credit. They have difficulties in enforcing contractual agreements. And of course, in terms of their expansion with regards to regional trade, there's always that liability of foreignness. So I think with this background being said, it becomes important for us to examine the core sub-questions shaping this study. Dr. Olayoku, have you been able to host the slides?
Yes.
No.
Can I share my screen? Yeah, I'm sharing my screen now.
Oh, okay. So I don't know if you're following me, but I can't see the screen, but I'll just keep on going on, right? So
yeah,
I'm on the slide. I'm on the slide with the learning outcomes, right? The learning outcome. That's the slide I'm on.
Okay.
Right. So so there are two key research questions that kind of shape this study, right? And in order to examine how trust and alternative institutions work within Nigerian context, it becomes important to examine how do Nigerian SME business owners, or in the context of this study, entrepreneurs, how do they perceive the formal institutions, right, within Nigeria and across Western African markets? And the second research question is, what are the range of institutional forms? So these are institutional forms that act in rivalry or act as alternatives to weak formal institutions, right? So what are the range of alternative institutions that act in parallel to the weak formal institutions? So I don't know if Dr. Layoko, are you sharing the slide with the right, okay, with trust and institution and internationalization. So this is looking at, drawing from Dr. Layoku's slide, right? This shows the range of studies or range of literature that have been adopted for this study. So I'll kind of tease through, and so that this can actually illuminate our understanding of the key elements of trust and institutions. So in regards to theoretical background, and theoretical background is quite important because this is what the study builds on, because it kind of helps to illuminate the phenomenon in question. Now, with regards to this study, right, two key theoretical perspectives stand out, right? The theory of institutional logics and the concept of embeddedness. Now, regards to the theory of institutional logics, what you get is that to date, a majority of academics and scholars have kind of tried to address the importance of institutions in developing market economies. And much has been written that entrepreneurial behavior needs to be understood within the context, or within the institutional context in which it occurs, right? So the concept of institutional logics is opposite and highlights how the cultural dimensions of institutions enable and constrain social behavior. Now, this theory focuses on the role of culture as a critical determinant of institutional analysis. Now, the proponents of this theory, right, Thornton and Ocasio, right, define institutional logics as the socially constructed and historical patterns of material practices, assumptions, values, beliefs, and rules by which individuals produce and reproduce their material subsistence, right, or their or provide meanings to their reality. So in plain terms, the concept of institutional logics, right, suggests that the identities, the practices, the beliefs, and the values of entrepreneurs are shaped within their prevailing context or their prevailing institutions. Now, the second theory is the concept of embeddedness, right? And the concept of embeddedness as pushed or proposed by Mark Granovetter elucidates the fact that economic exchange is embedded in networks of various interpersonal relationships. Now, the concept of embeddedness reveals the role of strong and concrete personal relations in developing trust and discouraging distrust and malfeasance. So in this vein, and within the context of embeddedness, the goal is that individuals are acknowledged to prefer to deal with people of proven reputation, people that they have previous historical interactions with, and people that they're quite certain that will behave in a way that is positive and benevolent. So these are the two key theories that kind of shape the understanding of this study: the theory of institutional logics and the theory of embeddedness. Now, a good question you want to ask is, what actually are institutions? And this is a key question I always get when I go to functions, and students and academics alike always ask, Kingsley, what are institutions? Right, so I think in plain terms, institutions are humanly devised constraints that give, that govern social and economic and political interactions, right? Institutions can be defined as the rules of the game, right? Because they reduce transaction costs and they reduce uncertainty in human behavior, right? A good definition was also pushed by Geoffrey Hodgson, right? And he points out that institutions are established and prevalent social rules that structure social interactions, right? So institutions kind of provide clarity so that people know what to do as at when expected. Now, Douglas North kind of goes ahead to define institutions and break down institutions into two. So these are formal institutions and informal institutions. So formal institutions are your constitutions and your legal framework, right? While informal institutions are your uncodified, socially transmitted customs, traditions, and attributes which are embedded within a society. Now, the durability of institutions, right, the strengths and the concreteness, right, of institutions are unique because they kind of provide stable expectations of others, right, and thereby kind of provide that consistency in human behavior or in human interactions. So that kind of gives us an overview of what institutions are, right? So institutions are the rules of the game. This is what you're supposed to do, right? They govern social and economic behavior. Now, another question people also ask is, what is trust, right? What does it mean for me to trust you, right? I trust you to do something, right? What is trust, right? And the concept of trust can be defined plainly as, in simple terms, as a set of shared expectations between two people in a transaction, right? A set of shared expectations between two people in a relationship. Now, and there are two main influential seminal works on trust, and these two influential seminal works actually stand out, right? The works by Rousseau and her colleagues and Meyer and colleagues, right, in 1998 and 1995. Now, so Rousseau, in their definition, defined trust as that psychological state whereby you accept the vulnerabilities, or you accept vulnerabilities based on positive expectations. Now, the central trust behind Rousseau's and colleagues' definition is that a truster, right, expects the trustee to act in a positive way, in a way that is benevolent, right, and which is in the interest of the relationship. So, for instance, if I was going to ask you to trust, if I was going to say, I trust you mean that I trust you to act in a positive way. I trust you to act in a benevolent way. So that is what Rousseau and colleagues defined as trust. Now, another definition, again, which is also influential in the discourse around trust, is that done by Meyer et al. And Meyer and colleagues define trust, and they provide another influential definition whereby they define trust as the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party, right? And this is based on the notion that the action that the other party is performing will be done without any kind of monitoring. So I don't need to monitor you. I don't need to sign for us to sign the contract. I believe you would act in a way that is benevolent, right? So the central argument behind these two definitions is that you as a trustor, you're trusting someone because you believe the trustee will act in a benevolent way and will act in an action or in a manner that is benevolent and that is in the interest of the relationship. Other definitions around trust by Zucker define trust as that set of shared expectations between two people in a relationship. And another definition, again, by Guido Mollerin defines trust as that suspension, right? The suspension of expectation. So I'm hoping, there's that hope in trust. There's that leap of faith that you will act in a way that is expected. So the key elements of trust is reciprocity, because you know that if I trust you, right, you expect me to also be able to trust you too. So when I trust you, when it comes to my turn, and I expect you to also trust me in carrying out a particular act of action. So trust is shaped by reciprocity, that reciprocal nature of the relationship, the expectations, that positive expectation, and benevolence acting in a way that is expected. Now, with regards to trust and context, and across the discourse on trust, so what a lot of scholars have identified is that there are two elements of trust: the ethic concept of trust and the emic concept of trust. Now, scholars of the ethic school identify that trust is general, that trust is universal. That the way trust is in the West, in the Western world, in the UK, in the USA, is the same way trust is in Africa or in other climates, right? While other scholars of the emic concept believe that trust must be understood from a local context, from a contextual perspective. That the way trust is in Nigeria, the way trust is in Africa, right, is different from the way it is in the West, right? So my study kind of draws on both concepts. So I'm not really standing on both, I'm actually drawing on both. That's saying, yes, that trust is universal, but trust also needs to be understood from a local context. So this study draws on an emic perspective, right, in uncovering the nature of trust. Now, regards quickly, I'm going to run through the types of trust. So there are two types of trust, actually three types of trust. Trust operating at the micro level, trust operating at the meso level, and trust operating at the macro level. At the micro level is trust between two or more people. It's called personal trust, right? Personal trust is trust between two or more people, right? And here we're not really willing to rely on existing institutional arrangements. We're not really interested in contracts. We're just relying on previous interaction, previous information about one's reputation, and of course, reliable information that, yes, this man is a reliable person, you can deal with him, right? Now, the issues around the concept of personal trust is there is a need for more understanding of trust from a developing markets concept, right? And there is also a depth of study or a paucity of study that have examined the influence of culture regarding personal trust. Now, at the meso level is the interorganizational trust. But what I've done is I've subsumed the interorganizational trust under the personal and institutional trust. So I will go straight to the institutional trust. So institutional trust is what we call societal trust or system trust. This is trust in the government. This is trust in state-backed institutions or state-backed legal arrangements, right? And institutional trust points out that people have belief or have faith in institutions, right? And when institutions are strong and effective, people are less likely to cheat or less likely to commit malfeasance because they know that they are safeguarded by strong institutional framework. So, for instance, in the West or in parts of let's use the West for example, right? We go into a transaction, there are contracts, and when you breach our agreement, right, the contracts are there to act as safeguards, right? And when I take you to courts, it is expected that the courts will enforce justice, right? So that is how it works in strong institutional frameworks or institutional context. So the issues related to institutional trust have been categorized by Francis Fukuyama under high trust and low trust environments. So high trust environments are where there are strong and effective legal institutional arrangements, right? Where contracts can be enforced and can be enforced fairly with justice rapidly, right? Now, low trust environments are environments where people have low trust in institutions, low trust in government, low trust in legal or state-backed legal arrangements, right? So the idea around the discourse is that strong institutions kind of provide those rich safeguards that underpin economic relationships. So, Dr. Laiko, are you at the conceptual framework part on your slide?
Yes, please.
Excellent. So this is the conceptual framework, right? And this kind of gives an analysis or a brief snapshot of what I've been speaking about, right? It kind of reflects the thinking of the whole research process and identifies some of the factors that I've been speaking about, right? So I don't normally do this, but I kind of like to carry the participants in this workshop around the methodological process, right? How I was able to go into the research, right? In terms of my philosophical choice, I was shaped by an interpretivist philosophy because I wanted to understand the real world of the local actors, which I was going to examine, right? The selection of people were done purposively so that the respondents were rich enough to be able to help address the research question, right? I used direct observations. I conducted 42 structured interviews across a period of 3 months, right? And this kind of helped tease out the key findings of my research. Regards to the validity, right? I just want to touch briefly on this to ensure that there was validity in my research. I ensured that the findings of my research was also corroborated with the participants. I shared it with them so that they could also confirm that, yes, these are what I've spoken about. And this ensured a truthful and accurate depiction of the experiences of the participants. Right. I also ensured reflexivity in the sense that I removed every form of bias, and I went into the research, ensuring that I was only able to capture the key findings through the lens of the respondents. So going into the field, right, it is said that it is quite difficult to understand the entrepreneurial process, right, without getting to the heart of the field. So with this, I went into the field around June in 2017, and my goal was to understand how small and medium-sized enterprises, local entrepreneurs, how were they able to do businesses, right, do their business without the use of contracts, right? I wanted to understand how this was unique within the Nigerian context, how their businesses were able to thrive, right, without recourse to formal institutional arrangements. And so I traveled all the way to a part in Bokos, right, in the north central part of Nigeria, and also to parts of the southwest in Lagos, right. So for reasons of anonymity, I don't really want to go into detail so that I can actually also provide the identity of my respondents, right. So the research was conducted around a span of 3 months, right, and the idea was to understand how informal businesses were able to navigate the challenges within their local environment. Right. Of course, it was difficult getting access because when you come to those kind of clusters, right, they're quite skeptical of your intentions, right? They don't really want to provide access to you because they're quite unsure if you are with Nigeria's EFCC or the tax office, or you're a policeman, or you're a spy, or you've got sinister intentions. So it was quite difficult getting access into the real world of these local actors. But with time, I was able to gain access after a period of 3 days. And with that, I was able to tease out the rich findings, and I was able to immerse myself into their social world. So what I found out, right, across my discourse, across the 42 respondents or participants, right, through interviews and observations. I think observations were quite unique because I was privileged to be at certain instances where I saw trust work out in economic transactions. So I realized that most of the respondents didn't rely on contracts, because they believe that the courts were for the rich and the contracts were expensive. And of course, when you go into contracts, you need to pay a lawyer. And even if you have the funds to pay a lawyer, going to the court to resolve grievances or disputes will take time. Some of the respondents pointed out that courts are for the rich, that there is no need going to courts, right? And that when you go to court, you could be in the court for a minimum of 3 or 4 years. And at the end, you may not actually seek redress or seek resolution. And in fact, people who actually have more funds, who have cash at their disposal, would always win in the court case. So without recourse to costs and without seeking redress in formal courts, I realized that the respondents were found to rely on trust through all oral and written agreements, right? And it's quite important to mention that these written agreements were not done with the presence of legal or lawyers, right? It was written on a piece of paper. They were more or less like memorandum of understanding. So the respondents were found to rely on oral conversations that, yes, I expect you to deliver these goods worth 1 million naira in a month. And yes, it will be done, right? And you pay me upon receipt. So what I found out that trust was unique here, but for me, I was kind of interested in how could trust work in a low trust environment such as Nigeria? How would I give you my goods worth of 5 million to go and sell, and I expect you after selling, you bring the monies back to me in a couple of months, and this will be done. So I realized that there was a plethora of alternative institutions. Now, if you do recall what I pointed out regarding formal institutions and informal institutions, right? So these are informal institutions that have emerged to replace the formal institutions, right? And these informal institutions provided quasi-regulatory functions, right, in encouraging trust, in encouraging values, norms in dispute resolution. So what I found out was that informal institutions, such as trade associations, so most of the respondents or participants belong to various trade associations. Now, these trade associations were found to do the work of the formal courts, right? They provide arbitration resolutions, right? They provide guidance, right? And they ensure that dispute resolution is resolved quickly and fairly, right, and equitably, right? I also found out that even the churches provide support, right? So the churches, right, local churches within the area, we are seen to provide loans to these respondents. So you realize that a lot of these SMEs cannot gain access to the banks because of high cost of setting up an account and unnecessary charges, right? So they realize, and of course, they can't even actually get loans from the bank, because getting loans from the bank would mean you providing collateral and, of course, a cash flow analysis. So what we realized was that the courts, the churches, right, religious institutions, even the Christian and the Islamic one, and even the traditional ones, provided loans to the bank, provided loans to these entrepreneurs. So I realized that cultural institutions such as trade associations, even the traditional institution, because we also realized that most of the respondents also believe in cultural associations drawn from customs. So, for instance, the Igbo traders belong to cultural and town associations that kind of helped cement these entrepreneurial relationships. And these cultural institutions also provided resolutions where there were differences and disputes to be resolved. Right. So overall, the key findings were that family also plays an important role. I realized that some of the respondents also had families in different parts of West Africa, and they could also export their businesses, so they could ship their goods to their families in Ghana, right, or Ouagadougou. That will help them sell, help them expand into those markets, and also remit the funds back to them. So we realized that the family was also a very strong institution that also helped shape relationships. Now, also the institutions, formal institutions, again, for instance, the trade associations also provided welfare support. So, for instance, I was privileged to be at the point whereby people had naming ceremonies. So the trade associations kind of provided welfare support for naming ceremonies and also during burial. So they provide support to kind of ease the burdens suffered by these entrepreneurs. I also realized that these associations, again, trade associations and also the cultural associations and the religious associations, such as NASFAT, also provided links to other networks in West African countries. So, for instance, the NASFAT here in Nigeria could also introduce a business owner here or a trader registered with the NASFAT association here could also get a referral to the NASFAT in Ghana, so that the NASFAT association provides that acts as a guarantor by saying, yes, go and do business with that person. We can say yes, that he's someone of good reputation. He won't disappoint you. He would act in a way that is benevolent and responsible. So what I realized, the key findings were that yes, that indigenous institutions such as family, religion, cultural associations, trade associations had emerged and evolved to replace the weak formal institutions within Nigeria, because the respondents pointed out that the law courts for contract enforcement were corrupt, bureaucratic, and waste of time and reserved for the rich. Right, so those are the key findings. I'm kind of I'm watching the timing. So this is kind of my framework. Now, what you might want to ask is, what are the key implications of this study, right? And I think one of the key challenges identified in my study is there are strengths in the informal sector and there are strengths in the informal economy, because the informal economy contributes a role to Nigeria's economic recalibration. But of course, you realize that the informal economy has been largely ignored, because all these SMEs, because there are a lot of clusters, right? Silent and invisible clusters within the Nigerian market, right? Which has actually been ignored. And there is a large chunk of transactions that go unnoticed within the Nigerian market, right? So there are potentials and advantages of trying for Nigerian government to be able to look into this informal sector, not to change the dynamics, but to provide succor and to provide support, right? So we also realize that what you get is most of the formal export facilitators and donor agencies often look at Western models of exporting for Nigerian SMEs, right? And they kind of overlook the roles that our indigenous formal institutions play. So there is a need to be able to look at how we can actually support our informal economies or informal entrepreneurs to be able to continue to thrive in this challenging environment. So for policy implications, how would this be of benefit to the Nigerian government? There is a need for reforms of the formal institutions. You realize that all the traders I interviewed do not believe in cuts because, of course, the cuts do not favor them. So there is a need for those reforms because those reforms will kind of help provide succor to entrepreneurship and also kind of enforce and recalibrate or accelerate trade recalibration. And of course, there's also a need for institutions, again, such as banks, to be able to also provide support to SMEs. Realize that when these SMEs go into one of the main reasons why the entrepreneurs do not have bank accounts is because there is really no benefit for them, right? And they can actually access funds there, they can access credit. So there's a need for non-collateralized interest-free loans that can be able to help these SMEs expand their businesses and also expand regionally. Now, on my way back, right, from those markets, I realized that there was a huge volume of trade, right? And this volume of trade was done through cash, right? And most of the respondents also identified that at most times there were challenges with kidnapping and armed robbers were laying their goods across the major borders and major high roads, right? So there is also a need for government to look into enforcing or providing simple banking electronic services, such as POSs, to kind of help mitigate these challenges and also enhance trade across the markets. So in regards to theory, I think this study kind of provides a foundation for the concept of institutional rivalry. And institutional rivalry suggests that, yes, within particular context, two institutional frameworks can actually act, they could actually act against each other, but not really act against each other. There could be that rivalry whereby formal institutions act in parallel to the formal institution. So this is the concept of institutional rivalry, where there are alternative institutions that have emerged in response to the weakness of formal institutions, right? And of course, with regards to theory, the study kind of adopts that emic ethic view that yes, trust is a universal concept, but there is also a need to unveil the contextual understanding of trust from an emerging concept, right? I think another key theory is that trust can also be built across generations. I realized that most of the respondents had generations spread across other West African markets. Some of the respondents had families that have traveled 20 years ago to markets like Bubu de Lasso, right? And this relationship still holds so that it kind of enforces trust and helps them expand into those markets. So I realized that there were relationships built over generations, and trust was enhanced as a result of socially embedded structures of family and relationships, right? So I think I would end at this point. That kind of gives you an insight into my discourse. I'll be happy to take questions. Sorry, I've run over time, but I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Dr. Laku, and thank you everyone for listening.
Father Charles, yeah.
Is Father Charles there?
Is there?
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Kingsley, for that intellectual excursion. And in that paper, a lot has been revealed, a lot of key findings about trust, about institution types of trust, the emic and ethic view of trust, which is the general view, and the specific view or approach to trust. And also, the paper also addresses the alternative institutions And what are the key alternative institutions that make our business, the SMEs, to be able to work? Sorry. The paper identified family, the role of family, the role of culture, the role of other roles. Sorry, let me stop my papers here. The SMEs, and the paper also brings out theoretical implication, practical implication, and policy implication. It's very interesting that the SMEs that we talk about forms 95% of Nigerian businesses. And that for me, it's something we need to look at. And if these alternative models we're having trust as alternative models for the alternative institution, the key question that comes or runs through or jumps out for me is that why can't this alternatives institution be transferred? The focus, why can't we transfer them to other key economic issues we are having in Nigeria, or transferable, to other sectors in Nigeria? So I want to thank Dr. Kingsley for making us understand that trust is the glue that gums every kind of relationship, and it's both global and it's also specific, and I'm sure that is what has brought many of us here today. So I want to thank you for your research and your key findings, and we want to leave the platform open now for questions. And there are so many questions coming up. And the first question to Dr. Kingsley is, when you know that trust is gradually failing, what are some of the signs one needs to look out for? And the writer believes that trust is built and broken over time. So how do we implement that in the context of SMEs?
Thank you, Dr. Father Shirambo, and thank you for that question. Well, the truth is, there are two types of trust, right? So there are two forms of trust. So there's trust and there is distrust. So distrust is what we call trust violation, right? When trust is broken. And when trust is broken, the truth is it is difficult to repair, right? And repairing takes a lot of strategies, a lot of tactics, right? One, I need to see that commitment that you want to repair that trust, right? I need to also see the fact that you need to be able to convince me that I can trust you again, right? I need to also know that, yes, of course, you've broken this trust, but how do you want me to believe that you would also act in a benevolent way? So it is always suggested that at the start of every relationship, right, you must ensure that distrust does not set in, because trust is very fragile, right? And when trust is very fragile, especially at the beginning of a relationship, once it is violated, it is very difficult to repair, right? Once trust is broken at the start of a relationship, it is difficult to repair. On the other hand, if a relationship has grown for, let's say, a period of years, right, and there is that distrust or trust violation, right, you as the trustor, you want to give room for doubt. You want to give room for, say, yes, there might have been challenges, there might have been issues. I realized in some of my findings that there were issues where trust was broken, right? But because these participants, they've been in business for a number of years, 10, 15 years, right? You realize that the trustor was interested in finding out what was the issue, right? Why was trust broken? And on going to the trader's market or to the trader's place, he realized that the trust was broken because the trader had lost his wife and there were challenges with the business, right? So with that, again, they were able to get back on a strong footing. There was an understanding. So when trust is broken, it is often very difficult to repair, right? And what I realize is it's with regards to personal trust, that is trust between two people, right? It takes a lot of time to repair that trust, right? But when you find out that members in an association, so for instance, we are in an association and we are governed by the rules of the trade association, right? The problem with violating trusts when you're under the umbrella of the institution, of the trade association, is there's a threat of reputation damage. Because what happens is there is this invisible gossip that spreads around the market, this invisible gossip that spreads around the association that you are not someone that has a good reputation. And when there's that threat of reputation damage, everyone's going to be scared to do business with you. And you don't want that, because for most of these businesses, it's a family business, right? It's a generational business. And having that trust in the market ensures that you are able to trade. Now, when there's no trust, when people are scared of doing business with you, you are looking at a decline in economic returns, right? So that expectation is acknowledged to be real. So that trust is that strong lubricant that kind of holds people together in the market. So once you see the signs that, yes, that someone is going to be trustworthy, what you find out is that traders are very quick to cut those relationships, right? Because it's very good to cut those relationships at the very onset than to be burdened by the economic challenges or economic burden that will come with a failed trusting relationship. I hope that kind of addresses the question.
Yeah, thank you. There's another word that says, if the religious group acts as guarantors, will they also accept the liability in event of a breach of contract?
Well, absolutely. And somehow, again, of course, there is that trust. So the religious institutions are kind of the institution. So that is an institutional trust. But religious institutions too are not stupid. I'll put it this word stupid, right? Because they must know you before they kind of provide that support. And of course, there's that kind of charity element to it, because to them, they're seen to be doing a greater good, right? They're pursuing fruits in the service of others. But there's also that kind of need to understand your history. So you must be part of that church or part of that mosque or part of that traditional association, right? They must know you. They must know your home, right? You must have that history with them, right? So it's kind of difficult for you to just walk in and seek a loan from those religious institutions. It is difficult, right? There must be that unionness, right? There must be that oneness. So you must be part of that family, right? Before they can provide you those loans. Of course, yes, there are instances whereby people would violate agreements, where there'll be distrust and where there'll be breaking relationships. Yes, in most cases, you'll find out that those religious institutions will take the burdens, they will take the liability. But of course, what does that translate to the reputation of the person? So the person, the trustee who has reneged or who has defaulted, right, will not be able to seek loans in the future. And of course, there will be that reputation damage, so that no one will want to do business with you again in the future. So that is how it works. There's going to be that reputation damage. There's going to be that historical reputation damage. And it will be very difficult for you to trade. It will be very difficult for anyone to do business with you. And you wouldn't want that as a trader operating in those markets.
Thank you, Dr. Kingsley. There is a critical examination that reveals that corruption exists in all sectors and has become a permanent feature of the Nigerian polity. Corruption is found within politicians, academia, judiciary, civil servant, police officers, even in religious organizations. So how would that, if the effect of corruption hinder the drive for development and trust that you have proposed in your paper?
Well, the truth is, that's an excellent question. The truth is, corruption is rife everywhere, not just Nigeria. Now, for me, I'm always very quick to identify or mention that we like to blow the African corrupt elements of it, right? And which is true. Of course, there is corruption. I do not neglect the fact that there is no corruption in Africa, in Nigeria, right? But there is corruption also in the West, right? But of course, it's not really blown out and it's not really made pronounced, right? But of course, corruption is a dangerous scourge to Nigeria's economic recalibration and Nigeria's economic stance. And in fact, I think a recent paper I read, the white paper from the World Bank, is that without corruption, we would have actually been 20 years or 30 years in terms of economic advancement. So what corruption has actually done for us is that it has taken us decades behind, right? But corruption can only be stopped through an ambitious government that does not rightly just put ambitious statements, but that is ready to do the work. And this is where the issue around formal institutions become important, right? Because once the formal institutional frameworks, right, is perceived to be strong and efficient, you realize that elements around corruption across every climb, across the institutions, the family, right, it becomes reduced, right? So when institutions are believed to be strong, believed to be efficient, believed to be able to distribute justice equitably, right, and people can go to the law courts to seek redress, and government officials are seen to be honest, right, and are scared of the sanctions that will be meted against them when they go against set regulatory norms, then there will be that fear, and it will not just enforce or strengthen our political climb, right? It will also translate to our everyday life and to the business across board. But of course, there's still a lot of work to be done in Nigeria. I'm an optimist, right? I do believe that things will become better, right, in the coming years, right? But of course, government must demonstrate that effort to improving the institutional framework. So once the institutional frameworks are right, and they are strengthened, I do believe we would see strong economic development, we will see strong political solutions across Africa, and I think we're looking at strong opportunities and possibilities for the brighter future.
Yeah, thank you very much for the response. There is another question on informal social rules and norms. That how do we get outside investment and diversification outside your culture? I think what the writer intends is, how do you get investment and diversification outside your particular culture?
Well, the truth is, with regards to the informal sector, right, one of the reasons why most of these businesses operate in the informal sector is the difficulties in playing in the informal sector, right? And as a result of high taxes, right, high registration, company registration levies, right, difficulties in gaining access to loan, difficulties in setting up a bank account, right? So they've chosen to operate in the informal sector so that they can actually enjoy the small margins that can come from operating invisibly in the informal sector. But of course, yes, there are strong opportunities whereby the government needs to also see how they can actually encourage the informal sector to also play in the formal sector by ensuring the ease of doing business. Right. So, but of course, in terms of diversity, it's a no-brainer, because these SMEs and these entrepreneurs, they're quite diverse in their approach, and they look at where the opportunities are, right? Across the 42 participants in my interviews, a lot of them were into manufacturing, right? They did herbal drinks. A lot of them were into agriculture. A lot of them were into manufacturing of slippers, local products, furniture, right? And they kind of expanded these things out of the country. So in terms of diversity, yes, there are room. They operate in diverse sectors, right? And there are huge returns on those markets. But the idea, I think, the question which is being asked is, how can we provide those kind of support, maybe in terms of investment, and help them to grow their businesses? So I think this is where the government comes in. I think the Nigerian Export Promoting Commission, run by Segun Awolowo, is trying to reach out to these clusters, right? But of course, the clusters must also be ready to embrace them, because one, there must be that trust that yes, we're going to come out, but are we going to get the right solutions, right? So the government should also try to reach out to these clusters, provide grants, not necessarily loans, right? Because with loans, there's always that fear of defaults. There's always that fear of huge taxation or huge repayments arrangements. So more or less, grants will kind of help these entrepreneurs grow their businesses. So I think a lot still has to be done. There must be some kind of ambitious effort on the part of government to kind of liaise with these entrepreneurs. I was at this small and medium SMEDAN, right, when I went to Nigeria, and I realized they were aware of these clusters, right? But these clusters are scattered around. So there must be some kind of syndicated and organized approach of reaching out to these clusters, providing support, providing resolutions, providing assistance that will help them grow their markets, not just within the Nigerian market, but across West African and regional markets. I do believe that a lot of work still has to be done so that we can actually gain the proceeds that can come from the opportunities that informal trade and informal sector can provide to the Nigerian economy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kingsley. There's this saying that trust is an enemy in time of war. How do you think the trust model will be affected in the face of the many troubles of Nigeria in 2021?
Well, Nigeria is a low trust environment, right? So trust is very difficult to be enforced in Nigeria. It's really, really difficult, right? But of course, there are instances where we have to trust. And if you realize what I pointed out in my thesis or in my presentation, was that trust is shaped by 3 elements: reciprocity, expectation, and benevolence, right? And it's quite difficult to trust governments, and it's quite difficult to trust Nigeria's government at this point. It's really difficult because it's one thing to say one thing and do the other, right? So your word must be your bond. And once people have that impression that there is no point, right, in trusting the government, you realize that there is no confidence. So that is why Nigeria and most emerging markets are acknowledged as low trust environments, because there's no trust in the institutional framework. And I think with regards to politics, this is also rife. This is also evident, right? Because there's always that fear that politicians will never do as they're supposed to do. And this trust, again, regards to politics, is also different, right, with regards to the institutional trust, because politicians, not just in Africa, but across the world, are seen as untrustworthy people. So with regards to politicians, I think that is a different area with regards to when it comes to trust. But I think we trust at the institutional level, right? The idea is there must be trust in institutions, there must be trust in government, there must be trust in policies, right? The government should be seen as wanting to work in the interest of the people and not in the interest of the government itself. So the first approach is government trying to instill that public trust, right? Ensure that, yes, people get what they deserve. Ensure that, yes, when there are issues of disputes and the need for resolution, right, they can always rely on courts, right? And this can actually help make people start to believe in that society trust or societal trust. So within the Nigerian climate, it is quite difficult, but of course, if you're going to trust within the Nigerian climate, there must be those kind of safeguards, right? So that, yes, I can trust this person because I understand his reputation. He's someone of strong integrity. So if I was going to trust a politician, is a politician who has been able to, over time, distinguish that benevolence. A politician who has been acknowledged to be trustworthy, who says something and does it. I think there are only a few Nigerian politicians that you can actually say, yes, that I trust this politician. Right, I can mention 1 or 2, but across the many, you see how difficult it is to mention people that you can actually trust. So it is difficult, but trust can work, right? But of course, it has to be shaped by reciprocity. It has to be shaped by benevolence. It has to be shaped by expectation.
Thank you very much for that response to the question. Another participant wants to know, how can the former institution leverage on informal social bonds and values in managing loans and grants from governments and other social institutions?
Well, thank you very much. I think, first of all, I think the new the CBN governor, Emefiele, is kind of trying to see how he can actually capture some of these opportunities in the informal sector. And the idea, first of all, is looking at the MPC rates and looking at how these rates can also be of beneficial or benefits to this informal sector, right? The rates in Nigeria and most across emerging markets in Africa are incredibly high. So for instance, if I was going to access loans here in the West, right, I can go for single digits at 4, 3, or 2%, right, for a mortgage. But in Nigeria, the average you would get is in excess of 15%, right? So this is really high, right, for businesses, right, for individual stakeholders. And of course, it's a no-brainer. The informal sector will not be interested, right? So if you are going to see how you can actually embrace them so that they can actually come out from the invisible informal sector, or how you can try to support them, right? You must be prepared to support them. And supporting them means providing loans at single digit loans, or providing non-collateralized loans. So they can come in without any form of collateral, and you provide them those loans, right? Provide them with grants so that they can actually, because these people, they argue they make little margins, right? So when they use the little margins they make from their proceeds to repay banks, it's almost like a failed business. So if the banks and institutions want to be able to embrace the informal sector, there must be that ambitious, not just ambitious, there must be that true support, right? That support has to be provided at every level, right? Government should also look for maybe dispute resolution centers, like we've got the customary courts, but of course the customary courts, when you realize that the customary courts are not also enough, right? The customary courts, also have some kind of government undertone in it, right? So what you realize is that the traditional associations, the market associations, kind of provide those kind of support that these customary courts and the formal courts do not do. So it is difficult, but I think the first approach is trying to look at the challenges these informal sectors or informal entrepreneurs face, and see how government kind of provide palliatives, not the palliatives that will be stolen, but palliatives that would help these entrepreneurs continue to do their business effectively and also enhance their growth within the Nigerian market and across regional markets.
Thank you very much. Another participant would like to ask if the research findings did shape your own personal perception about the Nigerian economy.
Absolutely, that's a brilliant question. Absolutely, and I think for me, I wouldn't have known the impact of the informal sector. I would have had first-hand experience by immersing myself into the real world of the economy. But what I realized is there was so much wealth in Nigeria, and I realized there was so much trade. There was so much trade going on within Nigeria's invisible sector, right? The volume of trade I saw when I was living there was incredible, right? Huge amount, and I do believe that this runs into hundreds of millions, right? Incredible amount of trade that goes through these businesses. So I realized there was vast opportunities. I also realized that in terms of manufacturing, there was a lot going on within Nigeria, right? Of course, we realized that Nigeria's strength focuses on her mineral resources, her wealth, but I realized that we've got a strong manufacturing base, but done informally in an indigenous manner, right? There were a plethora of manufacturers of locally made products, herbs, right, medicines, right, alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks, slippers, local hair, furniture, to mention a few, and this was exported across markets. So what I did was I was kind of interested, and I went to one of the markets, one of the cross-border markets, and I realized the volume of trade, right? But despite that volume of trade, I also realized that sometimes you find out that the tax officials knew where they were, and they're coming to charge them, right? But of course, these taxes, of course, do not go to the government because it goes somewhere else. So you've always got to pay those taxes. Now, what happens is the trade associations now liaise with those government officials and pay them off. So whatever profits they make, right, these profits also you have to settle. You have to settle the police. You also have to settle these government officials who come in and set arbitrary tax levies, right, to also take a share of the businesses going on there. So I do believe there are strong potentials. I do believe that yes, there is room and there is scope for development, and I think I saw those firsthand. I saw the opportunities, I saw the strengths, and I do believe with the right policies in place, the right support in place, we can actually leverage from the potentials of the informal sector. We can recalibrate our economy. We can drive regional trade, right? I realized we had strong trading partners. We are in the informal sector. We are Ghana, right? Bobo Dioulasso in Burkina Faso. We have strong trade partners in Togo, in Benin Republic, So I saw that there was strong regional and West African trade going on in my research. So it really was an eye opener for me, and I really enjoyed it. Seeing the range of informal institutions, the role of the family. I'll give you an instance. So in one of the responses, right, I realized that there was a strong reliance on traditional religion. Now, unlike what most of us don't know, right? We have two main religions in Nigeria. So we've got the Christianity and Islam. But we've also got a lot of traders who also believe in traditional worship and traditional religion, right? And this traditional religion is still rife and strong within the Nigerian context. So what I realized is that some particular traders did business based on ties to those traditional religion. So for instance, if I was going to do business with you, right, the goal was that we could swear an oath, right? And in swearing an oath, the goal is that if you default, anything can happen to you. Now, so what I realized was that the traditional religion was actually seen to be stronger than the Christian and Islam religion within the Nigerian context, within these informal traders. So what we realized was that most of the traders, they went into oath, right? There was oath taking to ensure that you act in a benevolent way. I also saw instances whereby the Muslim traders also believed in the Quran, right? And they could also hold the Quran and say, yes, promise that you'll pay up. And by holding on the Quran and by swearing on the Quran, the expectation is that, yes, you will act in a benevolent way. So I found that the strongest religions were not just Christianity in terms of trade, was the traditional religion and Islam. They were kind of stronger in enforcing the reliability of the trustee. So I think these, amongst others, were kind of the key findings. And I hope after the paper, after this presentation, I will share an interesting paper which I've just written, and it was published in the International Review of Entrepreneurship. It was published yesterday. Hopefully, if I can get a free copy, I will share it with the chair of the West African Transitional Justice, and he will share it with the participants of this session today. Thank you for that, Shuabo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kingsley. I think the next question has to be on your research methodology. Like, can we have an idea of the social demographics of your respondents in terms of age, gender, and education?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what you get across these respondents is a lot of them haven't been to the four walls of education. I think most of the highest levels of education are people who have finished at the primary school level, right? A number of them went to Islamiyas, a lot of them went to the normal local schools, but the highest in terms of education, you would get people at primary level, and maybe worst case scenario, a couple of those that are finished at that dropped out from secondary schools, right? It's quite difficult to see graduates who will be operating in the informal sector. Of course, there are, but you would see them operating in those clusters, right? With regards to the religion, an interesting element of my research was that it was cut across culture or ethnicity. An interesting aspect of my research was that it was cut across three main cultural Nigerian blocks. I think overall, right, I'd conducted 52 interviews, but at 42, I'd reached a point of saturation. A point of saturation is a point whereby no new findings are coming up. So I kind of focused on the 42 responses. And 42 responses across the three cultural blocks leaves me with at least 12 respondents across Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa cultural blocks. So the idea was, I wanted to see the differences across these cultural blocks, across the Hausa cultural blocks, across the Igbo cultural blocks, and across the Yoruba cultural blocks, right? So the idea was that the findings were different. Most of the Hausas were seen to be Muslim in nature, and they believe so much in the Quran, right? Most of the Hausas believe that women shouldn't be in trade, right? And that the trade was only meant for the male traders. The Yorubas we are also seen to focus more on associations. They also focused on the NASFAT. The Igbos also, most of the Igbos believed in traditional trade, but they were seen to be the most entrepreneurial out of the three cultural blocks. And across the three cultural blocks, identified that family was very strong, and that the wealth of a family member is the wealth of everyone, and the obligation of a rich family member was to also ensure that you build the family networks. Right, across the three cultural blocks, the family kin very important, culture very important, religion very important. Right, in terms of demographics, male, female, so I ensured there was heterogeneity. Right, rather than focusing on the male respondents, I ensured that there was a balance. So across the 42 responses, there was about 30 male and about 25 across the 52, about 32 male and 20 female respondents. And the idea was to capture their lived experiences and the nuances that these people face. For the female entrepreneurs, it was quite unique that there were female networks. We also realized that some of the northern female entrepreneurs faced a number of challenges, and this is a different discourse entirely, right? For instance, most of the female traders in the north, I believe, the expectation, the norm in the north, right, and parts of the north is that business is meant for the men, and the role of the female trader or the woman is to be at the house and to nurture the families and to rear children, right? And somehow you also realize that women are not also encouraged to be part of the trade associations, because somehow there is this silent religious code that men are not supposed to associate with women that are not their wives. So somehow there was a big challenge for most of the female traders. But of course, due to challenges and the need to cater for the families, we realized that most of these women were resilient and they had to leave their comfort zone. They had to leave their context of their localities to the west, to the west, to be able to do their businesses, right? And there are strong female networks that kind of help them work together, right? Provide assistance, loans, advisory to these women traders, right? So across, there was that kind of diversity in the findings. I ensured there was a strong mix of heterogeneity, male and female findings. There was an understanding of the three cultural blocks in terms of culture, in terms of educational qualifications. You find out that a lot of participants were spread across different academic qualifications, but not exceeding the traditional West African WAEC. And what else? In terms of age, the average, the oldest person was 52, and the youngest was around 25, right? So those are the key elements. Across sectors, again, I wanted to even mention, so across sectors, right, I kind of also identified, in terms of my purposive sampling, right, that I identified traders who were involved in manufacturing and traders involved in agriculture, right? So the agricultural entrepreneurs or traders were involved in the sale of potatoes, tomatoes, vegetables, cucumber, right? The manufacturing ones involved in the manufacturing of herbs, local drinks, traditional female hair, thread for making clothes, thread for making hair, slippers, furniture, and to mention a few. I hope that kind of addresses that question. So it's a big question, has multiple aspects to it. It's difficult to address in a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much. I think the last question for you on this segment is just like asking for a way forward, the place of trust in trust building. You mentioned a lot of things, but what's the way forward?
Well, so the way forward can be examined through two lenses. So for the informal sector, for informal traders, right? The idea is, of course, the only thing they can do is ensure they keep on being benevolent, being reciprocating gestures to ensure that they keep on operating within the market. Because, like I rightly mentioned out, when there is distrust, when there's trust violation, it's quite difficult for people to trust you again, right? At the formal level, of course, there's also that need for also trust, right? Because yes, trust can be mitigated with contracts, right? But of course, like I mentioned, contracts are often hard to enforce. But trust is quite important in our everyday life. And like you pointed out, Father Shiombo, it is that essential lubricant. It is that glue that binds us together. So trust at different levels, at the personal level, at the organizational level, at the institutional level is important, right? And it is quite important in taking Nigeria to the destined position where we need to be. So I think at a very macro level, I think the institutional trust kind of sets the tone for other levels of personal and interorganizational trust. And when institutional trust is right, so that we operate in a high trust environment, I think a lot of things work, right? Government trust themselves to be able to do what they're supposed to do. People trust government to act in a way that is benevolent by carrying out their jobs and carrying out their roles for the reason why they were elected. I think this kind of sets the tone for trust to pervade within the Nigerian system. So of course, there's a lot of work that has to be done, but somehow, trust can also be be at the institutional level, can also be tailored to leadership. So maybe leadership can actually provide a rich role in enhancing trust across the macro level, across the meso level, and across the micro level. So going forward for me, my research, right, I'll keep on expanding because Nigeria not just has 3 cultural blocks, Nigeria has about 250 ethnic blocks, right? Focusing on the 3 major cultural blocks is good, but it's not enough, right? So there might be instances across other 250 blocks that maybe what's researching. I think maybe future research can build on that. Also, there might also be need for cross-cultural comparison, this cross-country comparison. For instance, seeing how does trust work in Nigeria in comparison to how trust works in Ghana, or trust at a North African perspective, whereby how does trust work in West Africa in comparison to how trust works in South or Northern Africa. Then maybe at the end, we can now do like a cross-continent comparison to identify what are the lessons we can learn from trust from a Western context vis-a-vis trust in the developing market context to see the commonalities and differences. I believe this can bring about good findings. But of course, this is what researchers can build on my research to bring out these key findings and make honest and valid contributions to policy, theory, and practice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kingsley. Thank you so much for doing justice, for stimulating us, having hyper arousal, instinct in us this afternoon. Thank you for your credible intervention, your positive outcomes, and setting us in the right way for millennial goals, talking about your cross-cultural context of trust, viewing it and a way forward. I think a lot of people can pick different points, from the research, and also we can always build on it because there's always a block to build when the research is done. It opens the door for other things to do. It was Jim Lesgame who said that trust is a good business practice. But this afternoon, I understand it's not just for a good business practice, it's a way of life. It's a given. You can't escape from it. And if there is no trust, probably we will not be gathered around this table to be able to discuss. Thank you so much for all your intervention. Thank you for all the participants who made their questions available. There were some we couldn't just read out because they were interwoven with other questions. And so we just asked only one question. Thank you for the organizer as well. So I'll just hand over the screen back to Dr. Philip Olayokun.
I just got the stuff I was noted. So thanks for giving me back my screen. I'm so grateful. You really handled it well, So I can't be prouder to say that I've shared over 3 decades or about 3 decades of my life with these great guys who have made this a very interesting encounter. So this is part of what you're trying to do. Let me just chip in the fact of creation of parallel alternatives, which I think it's what the theoretical leaning of the findings of this research is. I won't take our time, I now have 2 minutes. But the fact is that when we create alternative structures, because we don't believe in the formal structures, it shows that the layer of trust with operating within these structures cannot, be ignored. So I give examples of even talking to lawyers, senior advocates of Nigeria, telling me that judges within the Supreme Court are purveyors of bribe. So when you have, so it goes to show that we need important reformation within these formal institutions. What happens in our law schools? What kind of credibilities do these lawyers have? What kind of credibilities do these court institutions have that we can now revert back to them? And it's also important that we contextualize our operations, on trust within our own setting. So not to take much of your time, I want to thank everyone for participating in this lecture. We know that, especially for the Catholics and priests amongst us, those from the Institute, you took out time of this special day. I want to congratulate you on this special feast and pray the Lord to bless you and your ministry. Sorry, I'm taking this out because I have majority of them this time out to greet them because majority of them are represented on this platform. Then I also like to invite us for our next program. Is on the 6th of May. We're going to have like a book review on Biafra. I promise to be very interesting. 2 of my favorite professors are going to be there. So please don't miss out on it. You'll soon see the posters being circulated. Thank you very much. All the very best for the rest of the Easter season, and I wish you a wonderful celebration at Easter. Thank you, Dr. Umie. Thank you, Father Charles. Have a very blessed season.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.